When Rome's legions shattered Queen Zenobia's army at Antioch in 272, her generals expected execution. Instead, they witnessed their queen suffer a far more calculated fate. Rome had perfected the art of breaking rulers without killing them, transforming defiant monarchs into living monuments of its imperial power. For women who wore crowns, defeat meant a brutality designed not merely to punish, but to obliterate dignity itself. Roman law afforded queens no legal protection. Under Roman law, prisoners of war existed in a category that stripped them of any protections granted to citizens. The principle known as jus gentium, or the law of nations, stipulated that military defeat converted free people into property. Once a city fell or an army capitulated, its inhabitants legally became slaves, regardless of their previous station. A queen possessed no greater legal standing than the humblest soldier in her defeated army. This legal framework established a terrifying reality. Roman citizens enjoyed rights that shielded them from certain punishments. The flogging of a Roman citizen was scandalous. An execution without a trial provoked outrage. Yet foreign captives, regardless of royal blood, had no such safeguards. They could be abused, paraded, sold, or executed at the discretion of their captors. Roman law made no allowances for gender and none for nobility. The 12 Tables, Rome's most ancient legal code from the 5th century before our era, articulated these principles with brutal clarity. Prisoners of war became property of the Roman state or were distributed among the soldiers. Women of royal lineage came to find that their former power was worthless once chains replaced their crowns. Tacitus documented this legal reality when describing the treatment of vanquished British nobles, observing that Roman officers did not hesitate to violate those who had once commanded armies and dispensed justice. Captured women faced an additional layer of vulnerability. Roman military culture, forged through centuries of conquest, viewed captive women as spoils of war. While some high-ranking prisoners might await ransom or political negotiations in relative comfort, most endured immediate degradation. The distinction between a prisoner of war and a slave was purely theoretical. In practice, defeat nullified any prior status, subjecting captured queens to treatment that would have been inconceivable had they possessed Roman citizenship. Royal captives were paraded in Roman triumphs. The Roman triumph converted military victory into a public spectacle, and captured nobles served as the centerpiece of these elaborate processions. When a general received permission from the Senate for a triumph, preparations commenced for a display that would parade Rome's dominance through the streets for all to witness. The route extended from the Campus Martius through the Forum and up to the Capitoline Hill, a journey of nearly 4 kilometers through densely crowded streets. These processions followed a meticulously choreographed sequence, intended to maximize their psychological impact. Musicians and jesters led the procession, followed by wagons carrying paintings and models of captured cities and faraway lands. Wild animals from exotic territories were led in chains, giving Romans a glimpse of the unknown world their legions had subdued. After them came the prisoners of war, marching in chains at the heart of the spectacle. Captured rulers walked at the head of the prisoner column, often clad in their royal regalia to underscore the magnitude of their fall. Queens who had once commanded armies now shuffled in chains before jeering crowds that celebrated their humiliation. The contrast was deliberate. By showcasing monarchs in all their finery, yet shackled and powerless, Rome sent a message that resonated far beyond its city walls. No kingdom was beyond its reach. No throne guaranteed safety. The triumphal procession served multiple purposes beyond simple celebration. It demonstrated Rome's military might to allies and potential enemies. It slaked the citizens' thirst for visible proof of victory, and it provided a stage for the systematic degradation of those who had dared to resist Roman expansion. For captive women of royal blood, the triumph meant enduring the gaze of thousands while being stripped of all dignity. The march typically lasted an entire day, with the procession moving slowly to permit spectators along the route to observe every detail. Captive queens walked this path, knowing their fate hung in the balance. Some would survive the day, others would not see another sunset. This very uncertainty functioned as a form of torture, compelling the vanquished to contemplate their imminent doom with every step through Rome's celebrating streets. Zenobia walked through Rome, bound in golden chains. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra had carved out an empire that stretched from Egypt to Anatolia, challenging Roman authority across the east. When Emperor Aurelian finally crushed her forces in 272 and captured the queen as she fled towards Persia, he secured more than a military victory. He obtained the perfect symbol for his forthcoming triumph. The Historia Augusta, a collection of imperial biographies written in the 4th century, offers detailed descriptions of Zenobia's appearance in Aurelian's triumph of 274. The account, which likely draws on eyewitness reports, depicts a spectacle engineered to overwhelm observers through its opulence and cruelty. Zenobia was adorned with jewels that caught the sunlight, transforming her into a glittering monument of Rome's dominion over the wealthiest kingdoms of the East. Yet it was the chains that commanded the most attention. These were not mere iron fetters intended solely for security. Zenobia walked, shackled in heavy gold chains so massive that guards marched beside her to support the weight. The selection of gold was intentional. These chains represented the very wealth she once commanded, now repurposed as an instrument of her bondage. Her entire being had become a walking exhibit of conquered riches. Ancient sources note that Zenobia maintained remarkable composure throughout this ordeal. Despite the mass of the golden chains and the hours-long, slow parade through hostile crowds, she carried herself with dignity. This very defiance might have saved her life. Aurelian, perhaps impressed by her bearing or calculating that her survival better served his aims than her death, spared Zenobia the execution that awaited most captured rulers. Instead, the emperor granted her a villa near Rome, where she lived out her remaining years. Some accounts assert she married a Roman senator and joined aristocratic society, with her daughters marrying into noble families. Whether this represented an act of mercy or a more subtle form of humiliation remains a subject of debate. Zenobia spent her final decades as a living testament to Rome's power, her presence in Italian society, a constant reminder that even the most formidable queens could be reduced to Roman dependency. Boudica's daughters were publicly violated by legionaries. When King Prasutagus of the Iceni died in the year 60 of our era, he left a will intended to safeguard his kingdom and his family. He bequeathed one half of his realm to Emperor Nero and the other half to his 2 daughters, hoping this compromise would preserve the independence of the Iceni while also satisfying Roman demands. The strategy failed disastrously. Roman officials, under the direction of the imperial procurator Decianus Catus, disregarded the will completely. They confiscated all Iceni lands and possessions, declaring the entire kingdom to be forfeit. When Queen Boudica protested this violation, her punishment revealed how little protection royal status offered defeated rulers. The subsequent events were recorded with unusual candor by Tacitus, whose father-in-law Agricola was then serving in Britain. Boudica endured a public flogging, an act that was itself a profound violation. Flogging a Roman citizen demanded legal justification and procedural safeguards. To scourge the queen of an allied kingdom, however, was an act of deliberate degradation. Yet the Romans did not stop there. Roman soldiers violated Boudica's daughters, who were likely teenagers and certainly unmarried. Tacitus recounts these assaults in terse prose, conveying his own shock at events that transgressed even Roman standards of acceptable conduct. The historian records that Boudica was flogged and her daughters violated, placing these outrages at the core of his explanation for the rebellion that followed. This abuse was not random violence, but a calculated humiliation, intended to break the royal family and assert Roman dominion over the Iceni. The public nature of these crimes magnified their impact. This was not a secret act, but a degradation performed before the Iceni people. By brutalizing the royal family in front of their subjects, Roman officials broadcast a clear message about the fate awaiting any who challenged imperial authority. The physical assault and violation of Boudica and her daughters were meant to terrorize an entire populace into complete submission. This strategy backfired spectacularly. Rather than crushing resistance, the violation of the royal family ignited a rebellion that almost expelled Rome from Britain. Boudica raised an army that annihilated 3 Roman cities, including Londinium, and massacred tens of thousands of Roman citizens and their allies. Tacitus records a speech attributed to Boudica, where she proclaimed she fought not as a queen, preserving her kingdom, but as a woman, avenging her battered body and her daughter's violated honor. The revolt concluded in defeat on an unidentified battlefield, where Roman discipline and tactics overcame the much larger British forces. According to Tacitus, Boudica took poison rather than be captured, Her daughter's fate remains unrecorded. They vanish from the historical narrative after the initial assault, their stories lost to silence. Executions occurred after the conclusion of the triumphs. As triumphal processions wound through Rome toward the Capitoline Hill, captive rulers knew their journey might end at the Mamertine prison, or Tullianum in Latin. This ancient structure, built on the northeastern slope of the Capitoline Hill, was the final destination for Rome's most prominent enemies. As the triumph proceeded to the Temple of Jupiter for the victorious general's sacrifices, condemned prisoners were led away to face their execution. The Tullianum comprised 2 levels. While the upper chamber functioned as a holding cell, the lower dungeon, accessible only by a hole in its ceiling, served as the death chamber. Here, amid darkness and filth, Rome's enemies met their end. The method of execution varied. Some were strangled, while others were simply left to starve. The act was intentionally concealed from the public, occurring as crowds celebrated in the streets above. Vercingetorix, the Gallic chieftain who united Gaul's tribes against Julius Caesar, exemplifies this fate. Following his defeat at Alesia in 52 B.C., Caesar imprisoned him for 6 years, finally parading him through Rome during his triumph in 46 B.C. The once powerful and commanding Gallic chieftain had so wasted away during his captivity that he appeared a broken figure to the Roman crowds. After the parade, he was taken to the Tullianum and executed. Jugurtha, king of Numidia, met an equally brutal end following Marius's triumph in 104 B.C. Ancient sources claim the king went mad as he was lowered into the Tullianum's lower chamber. He was left to starve for 6 days, his cries echoing from the stone walls as Rome celebrated above. The historian Plutarch documented his final words, reputedly uttered in delirium. How cold this Roman bath is. Simon Bar Giora, a leader of the Jewish revolt, ending with Jerusalem's destruction in 70 A.D., was paraded in Titus's triumph before his execution at the customary location in the Forum. Josephus recorded how the triumphal procession would pause at the Temple of Jupiter as messengers awaited news that the execution was complete. The ceremonies only concluded after confirmation of the enemy leader's death. Not every captured monarch faced immediate execution. The choice belonged to the triumphant general and, increasingly under the empire, to the emperor himself. Some captives were more valuable alive, serving as enduring symbols of Roman victory or as leverage in future negotiations. For those condemned to die, however, the triumph was merely a temporary reprieve before the descent into the Tullianum's darkness. The treatment of captured queens by Roman soldiers reveals the mechanics of power in the ancient world. Legal systems protecting citizens dissolved at the frontier of conquest. The dignity afforded to aristocracy evaporated in defeat. These instances, chronicled by Tacitus, Cassius Dio, and other ancient historians, compel us to confront the calculated cruelty inherent in Roman conquest. Boudica's flogging, Zenobia's golden chains, and the post-triumph executions were not exceptions, but calculated acts designed to crush resistance and display power. Consider for a moment how the systematic humiliation of conquered royalty cultivated the fear that held Rome's enemies at bay for centuries. The stone walls of the Mamertine prison still stand in Rome, a reminder that the triumphs celebrated in ancient texts were founded on human suffering. Queens who once commanded armies and administered justice were reduced to mere spectacles, their degradation serving as entertainment for crowds who never considered the empire's cost, paid in shattered lives and stolen dignity.